The world changed forever when the sky tore open. A ripple, like liquid glass, shimmered across the upper atmosphere. At first, people thought it was some rare aurora, a strange cosmic event captured by satellites and broadcast across news stations. But then the object emerged. It was no mere ship. It was a colossus, a behemoth of metal and unknown alloys, dwarfing even the largest human-built space stations. The sheer scale of it was incomprehensible, a fortress in the void, silently watching the Earth. Cities below fell into eerie silence. Streets emptied as people gazed skyward, some in awe, others in fear. Then came the voice. It didn't boom across the world in a single language. No, it was far more terrifying than that. It spoke in every language at once, as if whispering directly into the minds of all who heard it. A flawless, emotionless tone carried across the planet, bypassing technology, entering radios, televisions, phone screens, even the subconscious of those asleep. People of Earth, your time of isolation is over. The voice was feminine, smooth, yet devoid of warmth. It held a confidence so absolute that it was almost condescending. People felt it deep in their bones. This was not the voice of the savior, nor a conqueror who intended to threaten. This was the voice of something superior, something that had already decided humanity's place. Across every screen, a figure materialized. She was tall, elegant in an almost unnatural way, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that shimmered with an inner glow of violet light. Scholar Vailana of the Xelari Empire, as she introduced herself, did not wear armor, nor did she carry weapons. She had no need. Her very presence was enough to command silence. "You call yourselves intelligent," she continued, her lips curling in what might have been amusement or pity. "Your species has achieved much for a primitive world, but your understanding of the universe is insufficient." World leaders scrambled behind closed doors, desperate for information. Scientists analyzed every word, trying to extract meaning, trying to understand why she was here, but they wouldn't need to wait long for answers. Vailana raised a single delicate hand, and suddenly, the skies above Earth became a canvas of light. Holographic projections formed, displaying vast, incomprehensible equations, streams of alien symbols that pulsed with energy. Cities across the planet fell into stunned silence as the Xelari's knowledge was laid bare, an overwhelming flood of science that made even the most advanced human theories look like child's play. "This is knowledge beyond your reach," Vailana said, watching humanity's brightest minds struggle to comprehend even a fraction of it. "Your intelligence is inferior to mine, inferior to all Xelari. But I am willing to prove it so that you may understand your place in the grand order of the cosmos." Then, with the smallest of smirks, she made her challenge. "I invite your greatest minds, scientists, philosophers, strategists, to face me in a contest of intellect, a trial of knowledge and logic." She let her words hang in the air, the weight of them pressing down on every watching human. "If you win, we will acknowledge your intelligence." She paused, letting the impossible thought linger before delivering the final blow. "If you fail, you will accept the truth. You are beneath us." The transmission ended. The world was left in stunned silence. Across the planet, people stared at darkened screens, at the looming alien ship above, at each other. Some felt anger, others fear, but one emotion ran through all of them: helplessness. Because no civilization, no species, had ever won a trial against the Xelari. But somewhere, in the vast sea of uncertainty and doubt, one man watched with quiet determination. His name was Dr. Ethan Carter, and he wasn't about to let humanity be humbled so easily. He stood from his chair, staring at the screen that had just gone black. "Let's see how smart they really are," he muttered, reaching for his coat. The battle of minds was about to begin. The day of the trial arrived with an eerie stillness. Across the planet, people held their breath as the skies shimmered once more, and the Xelari vessel extended a beam of light toward the Earth's surface. It was not an attack. It was a doorway, a bridge between worlds. Dr. Ethan Carter stood at the heart of a massive research facility, surrounded by diplomats, military officials, and scientists who had spent the last hours debating whether this challenge was even worth accepting. Some had argued to decline, to stall, to negotiate for time, but they all knew the truth. There was no negotiation. There was no war to be fought, no fleet to stand against this impossible force. The only weapon Earth had left was its mind. Carter adjusted the sleeves of his worn-out jacket, unfazed by the chaos around him. He wasn't a politician or a warrior. He was a scientist, a thinker. And in his mind, thinking was humanity's greatest strength. A nearby technician signaled. "They're waiting." Without hesitation, Carter stepped forward. His form dissolved into light, caught in the beam from above, and a moment later, he was gone. Then he was somewhere else. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The world around him was vast, a shimmering cathedral of alien architecture, light bending at impossible angles, entire structures forming and reforming in real time as if they were alive. The air was thick with knowledge, with streams of glowing symbols dancing in the air, vast equations and patterns that seemed to stretch across dimensions. Before him, seated on a levitating platform, was Scholar Vailana. She lounged effortlessly, watching him as if he were a particularly interesting insect trapped in a glass jar. Her violet eyes glowed softly, filled with amusement and expectation. "You came," she said, her voice smooth, each syllable perfectly controlled. "A commendable decision. Most civilizations refuse. They fear what they cannot comprehend." Carter stepped forward, unfazed. "And how many have won?" Vailana's smile widened, but there was no kindness in it. None. A soft hum filled the air, and suddenly, the platform beneath him shifted, elevating him into the heart of the chamber. He found himself standing before a vast structure of interwoven light, a library of pure knowledge. Symbols, numbers, and alien text shifted constantly, rewriting themselves, adapting to something unseen. "This is the Xelari Mind Archive," Vailana explained, gesturing lazily. "A construct of thought, logic, and history. It contains the collective intelligence of my people, refined over millennia." Carter narrowed his eyes. "And you want me to challenge that?" A soft chuckle escaped her lips. "Oh no, human. You are not here to challenge a mind. You are here to challenge mine." With a single flick of her hand, the air rippled, and suddenly, the chamber was alive with data. Rows of information materialized, expanding outward vast holographic projections displaying calculations, puzzles, and theories that should have taken lifetimes to unravel. The sheer amount of data would have overwhelmed most human minds in seconds. But Carter, he took a slow breath. He studied it, absorbing, analyzing, not as a machine, not as an alien intelligence designed for pure efficiency, but as a human. "Let us begin," Vailana said, her voice filled with confidence. The first test appeared before him, an equation so complex, so layered, that even Earth's most powerful computers would have struggled to process it. Vailana tilted her head slightly, waiting for the inevitable struggle. "This is a simple test of memory and calculation," she explained. "You must replicate it flawlessly." Carter's gaze scanned the intricate symbols. He could already feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The Xelari were built for this. Their brains, their entire neurological structure, were designed for absolute precision. Humans, in comparison, were flawed, chaotic, imprecise. And yet, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to replicate it. He needed to understand it. With a slow, deliberate motion, he raised a hand and began to rewrite the equation. Not copying, not memorizing, simplifying. The symbols shifted, rearranging themselves, shrinking. Line by line, the impossibly large equation collapsed into something elegant, something efficient. Vailana's amused expression faltered. She leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as she watched Carter's work. The Xelari had spent centuries refining their intelligence, believing that raw processing power and data retention were the truest measures of intellect. But this was something else. "You are simplifying it," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Carter gave a small shrug. "Your equation works, sure," he said, stepping back. "But you're brute forcing it. Humans, we find shortcuts." For the first time, the Xelari audience stirred. A murmur rippled through the chamber, alien scholars whispering to one another, their expressions unreadable. No species had ever challenged the method of the Xelari before. They had always struggled to keep up, to meet them on their terms. But this human, he was changing the rules of the game. Velana's violet eyes studied him carefully, her earlier amusement now replaced with something else. Curiosity. "Interesting," she admitted after a long pause. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the holograms reset. "We will proceed to the next challenge." Carter exhaled slowly, shaking off the tension in his shoulders. This was only the beginning, and he had a feeling the real challenge was yet to come. The challenge was far from over. Velana remained seated on her levitating platform, her violet eyes fixed on Carter with an intensity that had not been there before. The smug amusement, the casual dismissal of his intelligence, those things were beginning to fade. In their place was something far more dangerous. Curiosity. No species had ever managed to unsettle her so quickly. Most who accepted the Xelari trial were overwhelmed from the start, too slow, too rigid in their thinking to survive even the first test. Carter, however, had done more than just solve the equation. He had transformed it. But the scholar was not so easily impressed. She tapped a slender finger against the edge of her floating seat, her mind working behind her sharp, luminous eyes. She would need to push him further. Without speaking, she gestured, and the chamber around them shifted again. The walls of light and data collapsed inward, folding into new shapes, warping the very space they stood in. Carter remained still, watching as the air thickened with an unseen force, a pressure that pressed against his skull, not physical, but mental. Then, the next challenge appeared. Before him, suspended in the air, were two glowing symbols, one red, one blue. They flickered in and out of focus, shifting slightly, vibrating at a frequency that made them difficult to perceive. Velana's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "Tell me, human, which one is real?" Carter frowned. It was a simple question. Too simple. He took a step closer, studying the two symbols. To the untrained eye, they were nearly identical. The way they moved, the way they hummed against the fabric of reality itself, it was almost impossible to distinguish a difference. Almost. He exhaled, letting his instincts take over. If this was a test of pure logic, he knew he would lose. The Xelari were built for that. Machines of efficiency, masters of raw processing power. If he tried to analyze the symbols like a computer, he would be walking straight into her trap. So instead, he did something unexpected. He reached out and touched nothing. Velana's eyes narrowed slightly. Carter smirked. Neither. The symbols flickered, then shattered. The chamber trembled, the very walls of the trial space distorting in reaction. Around them, the gathered Xelari scholars murmured in hushed, uncertain voices. Velana did not look amused anymore. You saw through it. Carter crossed his arms. It wasn't a question of which one was real. It was a question of whether reality itself was being manipulated. Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate clap. Velana tilted her head, an unreadable expression crossing her elegant face. Fascinating. Your species is more perceptive than I anticipated. Carter shrugged. Humans don't just rely on logic. We rely on instinct, pattern recognition, and sometimes, he smiled, we trust the gut feeling that something is wrong. Velana considered this, tapping her chin in thought. For the first time since the challenge had begun, She hesitated before responding. "This is unexpected," she admitted. Around them, the other Xelari observers whispered among themselves. Their expressions, once filled with detached superiority, had begun to shift, small cracks appearing in their once unshakable confidence. It was a small victory, but Carter knew small victories could change everything. The walls of the chamber shuddered once more. A new challenge was coming. But now, for the first time, Vailana was taking him seriously. The chamber shifted again, folding into itself, warping the space around them like a living organism responding to the tension in the air. The Xelari scholars who had once observed the trial with detached amusement were now silent, their luminous eyes fixed on the lone human who had done something no species before him had, challenged their understanding of intelligence. Vailana was no longer smirking. She watched Carter with an expression that was almost unreadable, but something about the slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers flexed ever so slightly, told him what he needed to know. She wasn't just testing him anymore. She was trying to break him. Without a word, she raised her hand, and the chamber obeyed. The air itself seemed to ripple with energy as new structures formed in front of them. Vast, towering glyphs carved from pure light, shifting and rearranging themselves in an infinite loop. They pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, impossible to follow, and Carter felt the sheer weight of them pressing into his mind. A puzzle, one that was never meant to be solved. Vailana finally spoke, her voice softer now, but laced with something colder than before. "This is a paradoxical construct," she said, "a question that has no answer. A concept so intricate, so interwoven into the fabric of logic, that even our most advanced minds have been unable to resolve it." She leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes piercing through him. "If you solve it, human, I will be impressed." Carter exhaled slowly. He could feel the challenge settling over him like a suffocating mist. This was the trap. The Xelari didn't just test intelligence. They tested limits. And if someone reached their limit too soon, if they broke under the weight of unsolvable knowledge, they would lose. Not just the challenge, but their very sense of self. Carter had no doubt that there were alien minds before him who had tried to unravel this paradox. He could almost picture them, beings with vast processing power, with perfect recall, staring into the infinite complexity of this construct until their very thoughts collapsed into madness. He wasn't about to be one of them. He stepped closer, narrowing his eyes as he studied the shifting glyphs. They changed constantly, rearranging themselves every few seconds, each configuration more confusing than the last. There was no pattern, no repetition, no sequence he could track. And that was the key. There was no pattern. Carter's lips curled into a smirk. He took a deep breath, then, without hesitation, turned his back to it. The Xelari murmured in confusion. Even Vailana blinked once, her expression betraying a flicker of surprise. "You're giving up?" she asked, though her voice lacked the mockery she had used before. Carter shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm rejecting the question." The murmurs grew louder. Vailana studied him carefully, but he could see the shift in her eyes, the way her mind worked behind them, rapidly analyzing his words. Carter took a step forward, leaving the glowing paradox behind him. "You told me this was an unsolvable construct," he continued. "An equation designed to loop infinitely, a riddle that contradicts itself. The only way to win," he gestured toward it without looking, "is not to play." The chamber trembled. The glyphs flickered, their glowing forms distorting for a split second before collapsing in on themselves. The unsolvable construct was undone, not by brute force intelligence, not by overwhelming logic, but by refusal. The murmurs of the Xelari grew into a low hum of concern. Never had they seen this before. Never had a challenger simply denied the test itself. Vailana stood slowly. She was no longer lounging, no longer at ease. She stepped down from her floating platform and approached him. The soft click of her boots against the shifting floor, the only sound in the chamber. For the first time since they met, She looked at him as an equal. "You would reject knowledge?" she asked, but there was no accusation in her tone. Carter held her gaze. "Knowledge is only useful if it leads to something meaningful," he said. "A problem that has no solution isn't intelligence. It's just noise." The room fell into silence. Then, slowly, Vailana smiled. It wasn't condescending. It wasn't amused. It was something else. Something almost genuine. "Perhaps," she murmured, tilting her head slightly, "your intelligence is not as inferior as I once thought." For the first time, Carter felt the balance of the trial shift. The Xelari were no longer just testing him. Now, they were listening. The silence in the chamber stretched, thick with unspoken thoughts. The Xelari had never encountered a mind like this. A mind that didn't just solve problems, but challenged the very foundation of how problems were presented. Carter could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in how they looked at him, how they regarded him. The whispers of the alien scholars were no longer filled with amusement or casual superiority. Now, they were uncertain. And uncertainty, Carter knew, was the first crack in arrogance. Vailana stood before him, her posture no longer entirely relaxed. For the first time, she wasn't watching him as a specimen, a lesser being struggling to meet the expectations of a superior intellect. She was analyzing him. Then her eyes flickered with something new. Determination. She lifted a single hand, and the chamber responded. The walls of shifting light and knowledge retracted, compressing into something smaller, more focused. The infinite glyphs and symbols that had filled the space moments ago were gone. Instead, a single glowing construct materialized before them, an artificial intelligence hovering in midair. It was no mere computer program. It was the Xelari's greatest creation. "This," Vailana said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that had not been there before, "is the Xelari mind engine. It is not just a machine. It is our greatest intellect, refined over generations, a sentient database of knowledge and logic that has never been outperformed by any species." The AI flickered to life, its form shifting between geometric shapes, its presence humming with an unnatural energy. It was like standing near a controlled storm, something vast and powerful yet contained within a perfectly calculated boundary. Carter studied it, his fingers unconsciously tightening at his sides. "This," Vailana continued, "is your final challenge." The AI pulsed with recognition, its voice emerging as a hollow yet melodic tone. Human mind identified. Testing parameters initiated. A massive display of equations, concepts, and abstract scientific theories unfolded between them. Calculations so advanced that even the best of Earth's supercomputers would take years to fully comprehend them. Carter exhaled slowly. The Xelari had abandoned the subtle tests. Now, they were throwing their best weapon at him. Vailana folded her arms. "You must outthink it. Surpass it. Find something, anything, it has not considered before." Carter's mind raced. This wasn't just another puzzle. This was war. The Xelari's AI didn't just store knowledge. It built upon it. It wasn't static. It was adaptive, self-learning, capable of predicting outcomes before they even occurred. The moment he attempted to solve anything directly, the AI would counter, shifting the problem just out of reach. Which meant that, just like before, he had to change the game. Carter didn't waste time. He stepped forward, analyzing the AI's shifting algorithms, tracking its patterns of movement. Its calculations were efficient, elegant, but they were also rigid. It approached problems with precision, but no imagination. That was its flaw. Carter lifted his hands, and instead of engaging with the equations, he did something the AI couldn't anticipate. He started drawing. Using his fingers against the projected data screen, he ignored the numbers and instead sketched a rough diagram, an idea, a concept, a theory that didn't yet exist. The Xelari scholars leaned forward, their glowing eyes flickering with intrigue. Vailana's lips parted slightly, curiosity flashing across her face. The AI hesitated. For the first time, it stopped. It processed the crude image Carter had drawn, a folded representation of space, a new way of viewing faster-than-light travel that had never been proposed in any database before. The Xelari had spent centuries refining their methods of interstellar travel, perfecting their warp fields, their hyperspace corridors, but they had done so within the framework of their existing knowledge. Carter had just ignored the framework entirely. The AI word, recalculating, running thousands, millions of predictive models. But there was no answer stored in its memory banks, no existing solution to pull from, because the idea had never been thought of before. Velana took a sharp breath. The AI flickered violently. For the first time, the chamber trembled not from power, but from indecision. Then, in a voice that rang through the chamber like a tolling bell, it spoke. Error. Data insufficient. No existing precedent. Silence. True, absolute silence. Carter stood still, his hands lowering as the AI's pulsing energy dimmed. It had not been beaten. It had been forced to stop. He turned to Velana, who stared at the flickering construct with a look that was neither anger nor defeat, but something else. Something deeper. She wasn't just looking at the AI. She was looking at the future. And for the first time in her life, it was unpredictable. The chamber remained frozen in an unnatural stillness. The Xelari mind engine, their most advanced and flawless creation, flickered in place, struggling to resolve the paradox Carter had forced upon it. For centuries, it had processed every possible answer, adapted to every challenge, and refined every theory known to its kind. But this was new. Carter stood firm, watching as the shifting geometric forms of the AI vibrated with an unseen pressure. The Xelari scholars, once so composed, now whispered in hushed, almost nervous tones. Even Velana, who had worn nothing but smug confidence from the beginning, was silent. She had expected Carter to fight against the AI on its terms, to battle logic with logic, to wrestle with equations and computations until he was inevitably overwhelmed. But he had refused to play by their rules. Instead of seeking the right answer, he had done something that Xelari never considered. He introduced a question that had never been asked. The AI whirred and pulsed with frantic energy, trying to comprehend the unfamiliar pattern Carter had drawn. It cycled through its vast databases, referencing every known concept, every law of physics, every scrap of scientific theory that had been refined over millennia. But it found nothing. Nothing. Velana stepped closer, her violet eyes locked onto Carter as if she were seeing him for the first time. The glow in her gaze flickered, an unconscious reaction to the impossible reality before her. You? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. You have disrupted the mind engine. Carter exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, he muttered. I noticed. The AI trembled again, its once perfectly synchronized pulses stuttering. It was not meant to struggle. It was meant to process, to refine, to improve. But now, for the first time, it faced a human problem. An idea not born from raw calculation, but from creativity. Carter turned to Velana, his expression unreadable. That's the difference between us, he said. You think intelligence is just data, memory, precision. But humans, we create. We imagine things that don't exist yet. And sometimes, that's more powerful than logic. Velana remained silent, but something in her gaze had shifted. The arrogance had not disappeared, but it had cracked, just slightly. The Xelari were built on a foundation of absolute certainty, their knowledge the guiding force of their empire. But certainty could be dangerous. Because once you were certain of everything, you stopped looking for something new. And Carter had just proven that new things still existed. The chamber hummed again, but this time, it wasn't the AI. It was the murmuring of the Xelari scholars, their voices rippling with a strange energy. Not confusion, not anger. Fascination. Carter turned back to the AI, watching as it desperately tried to make sense of his theory. He almost felt sorry for it. Almost. Then suddenly, the mind engine spoke again. But this time, its voice was different. Query. It said, the melodic smoothness replaced by something less refined. Something that almost sounded uncertain. The chamber went still. Human Carter. Theoretical model lacks supporting evidence. Further data required. Requesting. Expansion of concept. Carter blinked. He glanced at Vailana, who stiffened slightly, her expression unreadable. The Xelari eye had never asked for more. It had never requested clarification from a lesser intelligence. It either knew or it didn't. But now, it was asking. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered something it could not simply categorize and file away. Carter gave a slow smile. You want me to teach you? The AI pulsed, its energy stabilizing, but its colors shifting into something softer. Affirmative. Vailana took a sharp breath, her fists clenching at her sides. This was not how the trial was meant to go. The Xelari were not meant to be the ones learning. And yet, here they were. Carter folded his arms, tilting his head slightly. All right, but first, answer me something. He gestured toward Vailana. Do I win the trial? The AI hesitated, then pulsed again. The human's intelligence has exceeded projected parameters. Conclusion. Test inconclusive. Vailana's gaze sharpened. Inconclusive, she echoed, her tone carefully neutral. The AI flickered. This unit has failed to classify human intelligence within existing parameters. Carter smirked. That sounds like a win to me. The Xelari scholars whispered furiously now, some glancing toward Vailana for guidance, others staring at Carter as if he were something they had never encountered before, because he was. Vailana held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she exhaled. Her fingers flexed once more, as if fighting the instinct to reject what had just happened. But there was no rejection. There was only truth. And the truth was undeniable. The human had done the impossible. He had made the Xelari question their own understanding of intelligence, and that, in itself, was the greatest victory of all. The chamber was silent, but it was not the silence of victory, nor the silence of defeat. It was the silence of something greater, the silence of change. Carter stood motionless, watching the shifting light of the Xelari mind engine as it recalibrated itself, struggling to classify what had just happened. Its energy no longer pulsed with the rhythm of absolute certainty. Instead, it flickered in a way that could almost be mistaken for hesitation. For centuries, the Xelari had dominated the intellectual landscape of the galaxy. Their intelligence was unmatched, their logic flawless, their empire built upon the foundation that they were the superior minds. And yet, here stood a human, a species they had deemed primitive, who had not just challenged their greatest machine, but had done something far worse. He had made it question. Vailana remained standing a few feet away, her violet eyes locked onto Carter with a gaze that no longer carried condescension or amusement. She had studied countless species, tested countless civilizations, and seen every possible reaction to the Xelari trial. Some had tried to mimic them, hoping to prove their worth by meeting the Xelari on their own terms. Some had simply collapsed, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the challenge, broken by the realization of their own inferiority. But never had a challenger looked at their test and simply refused to play by the rules. The murmuring among the Xelari scholars had grown louder, the flickering glow of their eyes shifting in strange patterns. They were no longer simply observing. They were debating. Vailana took a slow step forward, her elegant form casting a long shadow in the shifting light. You have done something no species before you has accomplished, she said, her voice softer than before, though no less sharp. You did not solve our trial. You did not outmatch our intelligence in raw calculation. Carter smirked. That's right. Vailana studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she said something he never expected. You forced us to reconsider our own intelligence. The whispering among the Xelari scholars stopped. The words had been spoken. The admission had been made. It was not an acceptance of defeat. No, the Xelari were far too proud for that. But it was an acknowledgement of something far more powerful. The Xelari, for the first time in their history, had encountered a species that was not just intelligent, but unpredictable. Carter shifted his stance, arms crossed as he looked around at the gathered Xelari. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Velana hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had never been in a position where an answer was not already known. The Xelari had always entered these trials with the same outcome in mind. The challenger would fail, and they would leave the lesser species with the undeniable truth of their inferiority. But this was different. Slowly, she turned to the mind engine. The AI construct, still flickering with uncertainty, pulsed once before responding in its hollow melodic voice. Reevaluation required. Xelari classification of human intelligence. Incomplete. Further observation recommended. Velana exhaled, her fingers twitching at her sides before she turned back to Carter. "It seems you have done the impossible," she admitted. "You have left the Xelari without an answer." Carter raised an eyebrow. "And what does that mean for Earth?" Velana's gaze did not waver. "It means we will watch," she said simply. "We will observe. We will study. We will." She hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "Learn." The weight of that word settled over the chamber like a seismic shift. The Xelari did not learn from lesser species. They taught. They judged. They evaluated. They classified. But today, the roles had changed. Carter grinned. "That's all we've ever asked for." Velana's violet eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since their encounter began, there was no trace of arrogance in them. No amusement. No dismissal. Only thought. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she bowed her head. Not deeply, not dramatically, but just enough to send a ripple through the watching scholars. A Xelari high scholar, acknowledging the human. The chamber trembled once more, but this time, it was not from the weight of the test. It was the weight of possibility. Without another word, Velana turned and gestured. The space around them shifted, the shimmering walls of knowledge dissolving. And suddenly, Carter was standing in the same glowing beam of energy that had brought him here. He felt his body grow lighter, the strange sensation of displacement filling his senses. As the world around him faded, Velana's voice followed him, soft yet powerful. "Your intelligence is different from ours, human," she said. "And that makes you dangerous." Carter let out a chuckle just as his form dissolved into the light. "Yeah," he muttered. "We get that a lot." And then he was gone. When Carter's feet touched solid ground again, he found himself back on Earth. The beam of energy vanished, leaving no trace of the impossible trial he had just endured. Around him, the gathered scientists, military officials, and diplomats rushed forward, their voices colliding in a chaotic storm of questions and disbelief. What happened? Did we pass? Are they going to attack? Carter exhaled, rolling his shoulders before offering them a grin. "Nah," he said. "They're not attacking." The officials blinked, stunned. Then, what are they doing? Carter looked up at the sky, where the massive Xelari vessel still lingered, watching. "They're thinking." A pause. Then, for the first time since the Xelari's arrival, the great alien ship began to move. Not to attack, not to claim dominance, but to leave. They had not come to conquer. They had not come to subjugate. They had come to learn. And humanity had just taught them something they would never forget.